how do you make a teacher great? Now, it seems like the kind of question that people would spend a lot of time on and that we'd understand very well. And the answer is, really, that we don't. Let's start with why this is important. Well, all of us here, I'll bet, had some great teachers. We all had a wonderful education. That's part of the reason we're here today, part of the reason we're successful. I can say that, even though I'm a college dropout. I had great teachers. And in fact, in the United States, the teaching system has worked fairly well. There are fairly effective teachers in a narrow set of places. So the top 20% of students have gotten a good education. And those top 20% have been the best in the world if you measure them against the other top 20%. And they've gone on to create the revolutions in software and biotechnology and keep the U.S. at the forefront. Now, the strength for those top 20% is starting to fade on a relative basis, but even more concerning is the education that the balance of people are getting. Not only has that been weak, it's getting weaker. And if you look at the economy, it really is only providing opportunities now to people with a better education. And so we have to change this. We have to change it so that people have equal opportunity. We have to change it so that the country is strong and stays in the forefront of things that are driven by advanced education, like science and mathematics. When I first learned the statistics, I was pretty stunned at how bad things are. Over 30% of kids never finish high school. And that had been covered up for a long time because they always took the dropout rate as the number who started in senior year and then compared it to the number that finished senior year because they weren't tracking where the kids were before that. But most of the dropouts had taken place before that. And so they had to raise the stated dropout rate as soon as that tracking was done to over 30%. For minority kids, it's over 50%. And even if you graduate from high school, if you're low income, you have less than a 25% chance of ever completing a college degree. If you're low income in the United States, you have a higher chance of going to jail than you do of getting a 4-year degree. And that, doesn't seem entirely fair. So, how do you make education better? Our foundation for the last 9 years has invested in this. There's many people working on it. We've worked on small schools. We've funded scholarships. We've done things in libraries. A lot of these things had a good effect. But the more we looked at it, the more we realized that having great teachers was the very key thing. And so we hooked up with some people studying how much variation is there between teachers, between, say, the top quartile, the very best, and the bottom quartile. How much variation is there within a school or between schools? And the answer is that these variations are absolutely unbelievable. A top quartile teacher will increase the performance of their class based on test scores by over 10% in a single year. What does that mean? Well, that means if the entire U.S. for 2 years had top quartile teachers, the entire difference between us and Asia would go away. And within 4 years, we would be blowing everyone in the world away. So it's simple. All you need is those top quartile teachers. And so you'd say, well, wow, that's good. We should reward those people. We should retain those people. We should find out what they're doing and transfer that skill to other people. But I can tell you that absolutely is not happening today. What are the characteristics of this top quartile? What do they look like? You might think, well, these must be very senior teachers. And the answer is no. Once somebody is taught for 3 years, their teaching quality does not change thereafter. The variation is very, very small. You might think, well, these are people with master's degrees. Now, there are a few places, very few, where great teachers are being made. A good example of one is a set of charter schools called KIPP. KIPP means knowledge is power. It's an unbelievable thing. They have 66 schools, mostly middle schools, 7 high schools, and what goes on is great teaching. They take the poorest kids, and over 96% of their high school graduates go to four-year colleges. And the whole spirit and attitude in those schools is very different than in the normal public school. They're team teaching. They're constantly improving their teachers. They're taking data, the test scores, and saying to a teacher, hey, you caused this amount of increase. And so they're deeply engaged in making teaching better. When you actually go and sit in one of these classrooms, at first it's very bizarre. I sat down and I thought, what is going on? The teacher was running around and the energy level was high. I thought, well, I'm in the sports rally or something. What's going on? And the teacher was constantly scanning to see which kids weren't paying attention, which kids were bored, and calling on kids rapidly, putting things up on the board. It was a very dynamic environment because particularly in those middle school years, 5th through 8th grade, keeping people engaged and setting the tone that everybody in the classroom needs to pay attention. Nobody gets to make fun of it or have the position of, the kid who doesn't want to be there. Everybody needs to be involved. And so KIPP is doing it. How does that compare to a normal school? Well, in a normal school, teachers aren't told how good they are. The data isn't gathered. In the teacher's contract, it will limit the number of times the principal can come into the classroom, sometimes to once per year. And they need advance notice to do that. So imagine running a factory where you've got these workers, some of them just making crap, and the management is told, hey, you can only come down here once a year, but you need to let us know because we might actually fool you and try and do a good job in that one brief moment. Even a teacher who wants to improve doesn't have the tools to do it. They don't have the test scores. And there's a whole thing of trying to block the data. For example, New York passed a law that said that the teacher improvement data could not be made available and used in the tenure decision for the teachers. And so that's sort of working in the opposite direction. But I'm optimistic about this. I think there's some clear things we can do. First of all, there's a lot more testing going on, and that's given us the picture of where we are. And that allows us to understand who's doing it well and call them out and find out what those techniques are. Of course, digital video is cheap now. Putting a few cameras in the classroom and saying that things are being recorded on an ongoing basis is very practical in all public schools. And so every few weeks, teachers could sit down and say, okay, here's a little clip of something I thought I did well. Here's a little clip of something I think I did poorly. Advise me when this kid acted up. How should I have dealt with that? And they can all sit and work together on those problems. You can take the very best teachers and kind of annotate it, have it so everyone sees who is the very best teaching this stuff. You can take those great courses and make them available so that a kid could go out and watch the physics course, learn from that. If you have a kid who's behind, you would know you could assign them that video to watch and review the concept. And in fact, these free courses could not only be available just on the internet, but you could make it so that DVDs were always available, and so anybody who has access to a DVD player can have the very best teachers. And so by thinking of this as a personnel system, we can do it much better. There's a book actually about KIPP, the place that this is going on, that Jay Matthews, a Newsweek reporter, wrote called Work Hard, Be Nice. And I thought it was so fantastic, it gave you a sense of what a good teacher does. I'm going to send everyone here a free copy of this book. Now, we put a lot of money into education, and I really think that education is the most important thing to get right for the country to have as strong a future as it should have. In fact, we have in the stimulus bill, it's interesting, the House version actually had money in it for these data systems, and was taken out in the Senate because there are people who are threatened by these things. But I'm optimistic. I think people are beginning to recognize how important this is, and it really can make a difference for millions of lives if we get it right. Well, I only had time to frame those two problems. There's a lot more problems like that. AIDS, pneumonia. I can just see you're getting excited just at the very name of these things. And the skill sets required to tackle these things are very broad. You know, the system doesn't naturally make it happen. Governments don't naturally pick these things in the right way. The private sector doesn't naturally put its resources into these things. So it's going to take brilliant people like you to study these things, get other people involved, and you're helping to come up with solutions. And with that, I think there's some great things that will come out of it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. That was an introduction by Bill Gates in a TED Talk where he talks about schools and how teachers can get better. And we're going to go back to that later. The TED Talks are very influential and very popular at the time, and you may want to look at those. But I have two articles I want to look at, and they're really good articles. The first one is better than the second one, I would believe, but you can be the judge of that. And we're talking about school climate. And we're going to look at what the school climates are and how that can be interpreted and manipulated by school administrators, and how it also can be looked at in the wrong way and can have negative effects when you're trying to do school reform. Now, the first article is called Greenhouse Schools. And you go, well, what does that mean? And you have to really watch out on some of these articles, because some of these articles are, when they get published, they are kind of articles that people are wanting to steer people towards a reform program that they're used to. So, for example, if I create a program and I call it the Greenhouse School program, then students may say, well, he's just trying to sell that program. And some people do that. And I've been part of schools like that, where, for example, I'll give you a real world example. A guy in California would create a classroom management program that he calls the Greenhouse School program. He writes one article about it, and it talks about his program, and then he goes to each school saying, hey, this is a published article about this program that I've created. Here's the money that it would cost for you to implement it, and I'll come in for the training. And you really want to be careful with that. So if you type in the Eric or EBSCOhost greenhouse effect, you might get this article. But if you type in class climate or professional development, you're going to get a lot of articles, and some of the articles may be by people trying to steer people towards their program. But this is an article I found that was actually really good, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So let's just look at it, and let's scroll down it. The first thing it says is, as you look at it, it talks about several elements of it. So let me just tell you from my notes, I'll just tell you what it talks about. It says that a greenhouse school are schools with careful fostered cultures that help teachers and students reach greater heights. So that's what they are. It's a school with a very good class climate. So if I ask you what a greenhouse effect is, you can say greenhouse. Think about what a greenhouse is. It's where people grow tomatoes and plants like that. So a greenhouse effect or greenhouse school is a school with a very positive class climate that is going to encourage people to learn and encourage positive atmosphere. So what kind of school culture is going to create a greenhouse effect? And it says, this article pushes that teachers want schools with a strong instructional culture, a culture that fosters great teaching. Second point, schools with strong instructional cultures retain more of the top teachers. And that's something that we also see. And this is what research states. Positive school cultures, positive or greenhouse schools where cultures are improving, retain the better teachers. Schools with strong instructional cultures help students learn more, so you have an academic achievement. A greenhouse school also has stronger instructional culture, is where you have a committed school leader, so you have an effective teacher principal. Dramatic improvements in instructional culture or a greenhouse effect are possible sometimes in just one academic year. So as you look at this page, it says that Eric Hanshock analyzed hundreds of studies and found no significant link. Now, this is I circled this in my notes, between a school's resources and a student achievement after controlling for demographic factors. So that sentence right there talks about a 1997 study, but it's also a very important sentence, because what it says is no matter how much money you spend, it's really not going to have an effect on how great your school is. So you could have $1 million school with nice labs and a poor instructional leader, principal, and you could have a non-greenhouse effect going on where the school culture is negative, and you could actually have it where people don't want to come to your school. So think about that. That's very critical if you really look at that. Teachers at effective schools share a common vision of what effective teaching looks like. So that goes into teacher training as well. If teachers know what a good teacher is, then they can see that. So that also is an effect on a good college system. If you have a good teacher training program and that is funneling them into the schools, then you would say, okay, well, we all know what a good teacher looks like. Now, this, of course, is hurt by low pay. If you have teachers with low pay, then you're going to have to open up other avenues, alternate route programs, where you can't fill all the classrooms up. So you need to have effective alternate route programs that are showing people what effective teaching is. Now, that's a big issue as well. Also, mentoring. When teachers come in, first year alternate route, first year traditional route, and they're in the classroom and they have a solid mentor, that mentor is going to show them what good teaching is. So this key element right here, teachers at my school share a common vision of what effective teaching looks like, is a hallmark of a greenhouse culture where everything is going well and growing, because everyone knows what good teaching is. The expectations for effective teaching are clearly defined at my school. My school is committed to improving my instructional practice. And this right here says, teachers want, I'm going to highlight it, teachers want more environments that are a lot like the classroom environments. They strive to create for their students. They value working with colleagues towards clearly defined goals. So teachers want to be treated sort of like they're treating their students. When a teacher enters the classroom, they want, it's kind of weird. You have to really put this in, you have to really think about this. But when a teacher goes and talks to their principal, they really want their principal to treat them kind of like a teacher treats a student. They want them to say, the principal to say, hey, you're doing a good job. I saw you do this. You need to think about this element in your teaching. Think about using the computer more. Think about moving around the classroom more. Think about what you can do with this. And that's what many teachers do with their students. Is they say, hey, I'm seeing that you're struggling. Let me give you some helpful pointers. So if a principal walks up to you and says, hey, not that you're struggling, hey, I just want you to open your mind up, and I want to take you over here to this lab where Miss Johnson's teaching, and she's really doing a lot of things with the limited resources we have. I want you to watch her. And then also, I like the way you're teaching. I like your voice control. So I'm going to bring in some of the new teachers and let them see how you're teaching. So that's how teachers want to be treated. They want to see that there's a common goal, that we're all trying to get better. That's the key to it. Now, this right here says we created an instrument based on teachers' responses and items such as that within group students. And so it talks about how they did the research. One thing, I do apologize, we were looking at I did not scan every other page. So I scanned every other page, didn't scan front and back. So I'll upload the document with the whole thing on there, all the pages. But I'm going to go over the rest of this other section. It's like you're missing page 2 here. So I'm going to tell you what I see on page 2. And it talks about, why do effective teachers leave? It talks about why are effective teachers leaving the classroom? And it says that the top 5 factors that effective teachers cited, why are teachers leaving the school? So, and this is one of the big things that many principals are having trouble with. You have an effective teacher, and that effective teacher leaves your class. So let's look at two categories. One category is the greenhouse school, and the other category is the non-greenhouse school that is not doing well. So the greenhouse school, why are teachers leaving? 47% of a greenhouse positive culture environment says that they're leaving for personal reasons. And they don't elaborate. And this can be your husband or wife got another job somewhere else. They've got another degree. They're moving out of the teaching field, but personal reasons. Now that's 42%. The number one non-greenhouse, so a kind of toxic school environment, they state the same thing. Personal reasons. Now, follow that up with the second reason. The second most cited reason for teachers leaving. At the greenhouse school, the effective teacher, second top reason, 13% workload. They said that they work too much, but that's only 13%. Now, at the non-effective, the non-greenhouse school, they state 18%, which is tied with the number one reason for them, dissatisfaction with school leadership. So, when an effective teacher leaves a greenhouse school, they're mainly saying, I'm leaving because the majority of the reason, almost 50% of the time, I'm leaving because of just personal reasons. It's time for me to move on. So that's okay. We all cannot teach the same school for the history of the world. But an ineffective school, a non-greenhouse school, that has a negative culture, teachers are leaving because, one, they're saying personal reasons, but also tied with that is, I just don't like the leadership. I don't agree with this goal. Now, that's bad. That's real bad. Now, the benefits of a strong instructional culture, this right here. The benefits of a strong instructional culture. Overall, each 1 point increase in school's insight index corresponds to a 90% decrease in the likelihood that any given teacher will leave at the end of the current school year. So what does that paragraph mean? It means that they did the index survey. It means that when a school is doing very well and a school has a greenhouse effect, there decreases that an effective teacher will leave that school. And that's common sense. A very good greenhouse culture where everything is growing, everyone is happy, has less teachers leaving. It also says the greenhouse school also helped their students learn more. On average, students' proficiency rates were 20% higher. So and this is one of the big things right here is you've got students, 21% increase on proficiency because teachers are happy to be there. So that's a big key element right there. The article continues on and states, creating a greenhouse school. How can you create a greenhouse school? One element is, number one, a high bar for hiring. Now, this is difficult in the state of Mississippi because we have major teacher shortages that are contributing mainly to the teacher pay. But if you have a high bar for hiring, then teachers actually leave the interview thinking that I want to work here. Now, I'm going to give you an example. I interviewed at a university many years ago, and I received the job. I interviewed at the university, and as I interviewed at the university, I'll put my little webcam on here so you can. No, I won't put my webcam on. I was going to show you, but anyway, as I interviewed at the university, the interview process at a university is very lengthy. The first thing you do, I'll walk you through the whole thing. First thing you do is you have to. They'll send you an agenda. And they'll ask you, are you going to fly? Or they're going to reimburse you for mileage and travel and all that stuff. So you arrive, and when you arrive, they'll generally give you a hotel room, and then you spend the night, and then the next day is full of just all kinds of meetings you have to go to, and you have to give interviews. Well, this university I interviewed at, we didn't do that. I drove in at 5 in the morning, and I got there at 8, and my fiance was with me at the time, and we're driving around, and we're like, this is a nice little town. And by 9 o'clock, the interview had started, and I interviewed with about 4 different groups. And halfway during the interview process, I was told, we're going to nominate you for this job. I left there. I got in the car with my wife and my future wife, and I said, well, I guess I'm getting the job, and I kind of drove off. But I didn't really have as I drove back, I thought, that was kind of easy. Wow, that was easy. Boom. But I didn't really think like I want the job. I kind of felt kind of weird. It's like, hey, and that was because the hiring bar was not high. Now, I interviewed, compare that to Mississippi State University. I interviewed here, and it was quite different. I was told very clearly that they were interviewing multiple people for the job, and which they did. They interviewed at least 3. And it's an all-day interview. It's many hours. And I got to meet a lot of very exciting people who were doing a lot of research. And I was very excited to just be to walk in these hallways. And then when I left, they were like, thank you so much for coming. We'll be in touch. Goodbye. And that was it. And you leave and you're like, man, I really want to be part of that. That seems like that's very competitive to get in. And I left and that was it. But see, I was like, okay. And my wife called, and she was my wife at the time. She still is my wife. But she called and she said, did you get the job? And I said, no. I said, I have no idea if I got the job. I said, but I would like to get that job because it seems like they're doing some really good stuff there. So I asked, when the hiring bar is high, then people definitely want to work there. And when you get the call, and I got a phone call a couple of days later saying, we'd like to offer you the job, and the pay is this, and this is the package. Do you accept? And they said, take some time and talk about it. And I said, sure, I'll accept it. And I accepted it. I was very happy. And so when the hiring bar was so high and I came into this job, I was like, I'm going to do the best I can. So that was a very key element of that, is when the hiring bar is high, many teachers said that when the interview process was high and difficult, then it actually made them feel like they wanted to work there. So think about that. And that's what we tell new teachers always. If they offer you a job in the interview, you may want to weigh that. Does that desperation, and we're seeing through research that when that desperation of please work here also contributes to people saying, is this really a good job if y'all are just begging people to come work here? The second thing is they focus on student learning. So this is creating a greenhouse school. You have to have high expectations for students, and that's what it says. Now, that does not mean that you need to fail everybody. It just means that 90% of teachers believe that the school sets high standards. And when the standards are not met, they try to help the students. So to have high standards is very important and very key. Number 3 is right here. It says real instructional leadership. Principals are not, and look at this key right here, are not just building managers. I thought that was very, very key. Teachers are not building managers. And I like that. I really like that idea. Some principals actually believe that as long as the lights are on and the sewer's paid and the water's running, then they're doing their job. But they really want principals, a good greenhouse school, and look at this right here, gives regular feedback on their performance. And it says right here, it says that an effective greenhouse school, typically 8 times a year, the teacher is observed by the principal or a personal leadership role. That is rarely done in Mississippi schools. I was observed twice a year, and it was very mechanical. The principal came in 10 minutes late, sat in the back, listened to the lecture, act like he didn't want to be there, and then left. And then I would get in my mailbox a debrief, a little summary of my evaluation. It said, that was it. And then one time we had to do face-to-face meetings, and he's like, yeah, your lecture was good, this is good, but remember they're 8th graders. I remember that. I said, what's that mean? He said, just remember they're 8th graders. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, remember they're 8th graders. I said, oh, are you saying that we need to lower our standards a little bit? He said, just remember they're 8th graders. And that's all he said. And that has haunted me. I was like, what does that mean? I guess that means that I was expecting too much from them. And I was like, okay, but there was no other continuation of a conversation. And that's what this says. That a greenhouse school, the principal just talks to the teachers. The principal helps the teachers. That's what we're losing in a lot of our schools because we have a lot of ineffective schools. We're losing this. We see the principal and our stomach flips like, oh no, there's the boss. Am I in trouble? What did I do wrong? You want a boss that when you see them, your stomach doesn't flip. You go, oh, well, there's my boss. See, that's an effective greenhouse school. If you are, one, a hardworking teacher, and you're doing the best you can, and you see your boss, does your stomach flip? Like, oh no, what about, uh-oh? Or is it, hey, can you go talk to your boss? Hey, I got an idea, I want to do this. And he goes, well, we don't really have the money, but let's try this. Okay, and you can just talk. Feedback is one of the key elements of this. A combination of frequent observations and the greater likelihood of feedback after each observation means teachers at schools with top insight scores receive 3 times as much feedback. And that's why whenever we observe student teachers and MAT, alternate route student teachers in internship, we have a sit-down meeting afterwards, and we just say, let's talk about this. You know, tell me what you saw in this lecture. Tell me what happened. And many teachers kind of get nervous by that. But we would sit down with them and we say, you know, we saw this, we saw that. And they go, oh, did I fail? Like, look, it's not about passing or failing. I'm here to help you. Oh, and that's when it goes into assessments, which we talked about earlier, formative and summative. We really want to have a good formative. So kind of, when you tie assessments to this article, a good formative makes, you kind of want to have formative assessments constantly. The next one is better professional development. Now, this is a key element. Many teachers, whenever you start working, you're going to receive a 9-month contract if you're a teacher, and you'll have professional development days, or they'll call them teacher days. So 3 days or 4 days before school starts, you'll have teacher days. And you go, what is that about? Well, it's supposed to have staff development going on. But many schools don't really do a good job at staff development. They call it professional development days. It needs to be well planned and well facilitated. Well planned and well facilitated. That's what greenhouse schools say. They say that our professional development is well planned. Well planned. I mean, think about going into as a brand new teacher. You walk in, brand new, I mean, you're still wet behind your ears, and you go in to a school and they say, okay, Monday morning is teacher day, teacher development day. And you go, okay. And you walk in and they say, come with me, welcome to this. First, 8 o'clock, come on, let's talk about IEPs and special education inclusion. And you're like, okay. And there's the SPED department, and they're talking to you about paperwork, and you're looking at that, and you're like, okay. And they go, 9 o'clock, let me go show you your office. Let me go show you your classroom. You look at your classroom. And they say, okay, 9:20, I'm going to take you around to Miss Logan's office, classroom. I'm going to take you to Miss Smith's classroom. And I'm going to show you how they have laid out their classrooms. Look at their design. Look at their desk. Look at how they've lined it. And okay, and then 9:25, I'm going to let you talk to a veteran teacher about their layout. And at 10 o'clock, we're all going to meet. You can go to your classroom and you can lay out your desk the way you want to. See? And you're like, wow, okay, 11 o'clock, let's go have lunch. 12 o'clock, while right after lunch, let's do first aid training. You know, and just have everything connected. Boom, boom, boom. And you're like, wow. So you leave at 3 o'clock going, I really enjoyed this. You got some classroom time. You got some time to move around your chairs. You got some ideas. But what is it? Now look at the bad school. 8 o'clock, faculty meeting. Principal stands up. We got to do this. We got to do that. We got to do this. By 9:30, like, man, my back's hurting. 9:40, you get out, you go to your classroom. And it goes from 9:40 to 1 o'clock, you just stay in your classroom and work on stuff. So you don't know what's doing. You're trying to get your desk you're like, this is crazy. Same thing. See, well organized is one of the key words. The right responses to good and bad performances. Now listen to this. Greenhouse schools say that they have the opportunities to advance compared to 34% at schools with bottom scores. So two-thirds of teachers in ineffective schools state that they do not feel like they can go anywhere in their job. Could you imagine being in a job that you believe you have no advancement? Now, I got a buddy who works at a bank, and he says, well, I can buy stock in the bank. And every time I work hard, my portfolio looks better. It's like, well, that's good. But as a school teacher, and you're in an ineffective school, you're in a non-greenhouse school, 67% of those teachers believe that they have nowhere to move up to. There's no, I'm a department chair. There's none of that. But an effective school, a greenhouse school, says, hey, I know that if I do well and I work hard, I can move up. I may get a department chair position. I may get an extra planning period. I may get to pick my classes I'm going to teach next semester. I may be on a different committee. I may be on the hiring committee. Little things like that. Yeah, some schools actually have a hiring committee where there's 5 or 10 teachers who are help interview people, and teachers, they try to move towards that. See, that's one of the big elements of that. Now, importantly, school leaders must create strong cultures and also remove ineffective teachers. Whenever an ineffective teacher is removed from a school, at a greenhouse school, the majority of the teachers agree with that dismissal. And that's a key element. When a bad teacher is removed, yes, it is tumultuous, but at a greenhouse school, the teachers go, yes, that person should have been removed. And that's what many teachers, many principals, they're good at. You know, they can fire people pretty fast. But when you fire an effective teacher, there's an issue. So we need to really, they always talk about the rotten apple can ruin the batch. But you definitely want to make sure you correct the bad teachers. Don't just promote the good one, correct the bad ones. I've been at jobs where colleagues didn't come to work. They came to work late. Well, that's not fair. And people go, well, that's not fair. And then everybody starts coming in late. So the article continues on. It gives you an example of Hillcrest High School. And then after that, it starts giving an appendix. And it goes into the technical appendix, and it starts talking about all that. You don't have to worry about that. But it's a very good article, and it talks about the greenhouse effect, the greenhouse culture. And I really like this article because it really isn't selling anything. And I like that. And it just talks about how a school can flourish. And so just let's review this article. I've really enjoyed this article. Let's review this article. It talks about 2 categories. You have an ineffective and then a greenhouse school where culture is really going on. So just to re-hit this, you have a greenhouse school has a high bar for hiring. It's a focus on student learning. It has a great, effective leader. And this is one key element, an effective principal and administration that gives multiple feedback in a formative way that helps the teacher become a better teacher. The second thing it does is it creates professional development, training, formative development that's very well planned, very well organized. Also, when bad performance is done, when a bad teacher is doing a bad job, that teacher is removed and everyone agrees, everyone's fine with it. And when a teacher is doing good, they can see promotion, they can see movement up. That's a key element of that. And that is a greenhouse school. I got some more videos, and then we're going to hit this next article. Real simple. I hope you enjoyed that part.
Everyone needs a coach. It doesn't matter whether you're a basketball player, a tennis player, a gymnast, or a bridge player. My bridge coach, Sharon Osberg, says there are more pictures of the back of her head than anyone else's in the world. Sorry, Sharon. Here you go. We all need people who will give us feedback. That's how we improve. Unfortunately, there's one group of people who get almost no systematic feedback to help them do their jobs better. And these people have one of the most important jobs in the world. I'm talking about teachers. When Melinda and I learned how little useful feedback most teachers get, we were blown away. Until recently, over 98% of teachers just got one word of feedback: satisfactory. If all my bridge coach ever told me was that I was satisfactory, I would have no hope of ever getting better. How would I know who is the best? How would I know what I was doing differently? Today, districts are revamping the way they evaluate teachers, but we still give them almost no feedback that actually helps them improve their practice. Our teachers deserve better. The system we have today isn't fair to them. It's not fair to students, and it's putting America's global leadership at risk. So today I want to talk about how we can help all teachers get the tools for improvement they want and deserve. Let's start by asking, who's doing well? Well, unfortunately, there's no international ranking tables for teacher feedback systems. So I looked at the countries whose students perform well academically and looked at what they're doing to help their teachers improve. Consider the rankings for reading proficiency. The U.S. isn't number one. We're not even in the top 10. We're tied for 15th with Iceland and Poland. Now, out of all the places that do better than the U.S. in reading, how many of them have a formal system for helping teachers improve? 11 out of 14. The U.S. is tied for 15th in reading, but we're 23rd in science and 31st in math. So there's really only one area where we're near the top, and that's in failing to give our teachers the help they need to develop their skills. Let's look at the best academic performer, the province of Shanghai, China. Now, they rank #1 across the board in reading, math, and science. And one of the keys to Shanghai's incredible success is the way they help teachers keep improving. They make sure that younger teachers get a chance to watch master teachers at work. They have weekly study groups where teachers get together and talk about what's working. They even require each teacher to observe and give feedback to their colleagues. You might ask, why is a system like this so important? It's because there's so much variation in the teaching profession. Some teachers are far more effective than others. In fact, there are teachers throughout the country who are helping their students make extraordinary gains. If today's average teacher could become as good as those teachers, our students would be blowing away the rest of the world. So we need a system that helps all our teachers be as good as the best. What would that system look like? Well, to find out, our foundation has been working with 3,000 teachers in districts across the country on a project called Measures of Effective Teaching. We had observers watch videos of teachers in the classroom and rate how they did on a range of practices. For example, did they ask their students challenging questions? Did they find multiple ways to explain an idea? We also had students fill out surveys with questions like, does your teacher know when the class understands a lesson? Do you learn to correct your mistakes? And what we found is very exciting. First, the teachers who did well on these observations had far better student outcomes. So it tells us we're asking the right questions. And second, teachers in the program told us that these videos and these surveys from the students were very helpful diagnostic tools because they pointed to specific places where they can improve. I'm going to show you what this video component of MET looks like in action.
Good morning, everybody. Let's talk about what's going on today. To get started, doing a peer review day, okay, a peer review day. And our goal by the end of class is for you to be able to determine whether or not you have moves to prove in your essays.
My name is Sarah Brown-Westling. I am a high school English teacher at Johnston High School in Johnston, Iowa.
Turn to somebody next to you. Tell them what you think I mean when I talk about moves to prove.
I think that there is a difference for teachers between the abstract of how we see our practice and then the concrete reality of it.
Okay, so I would like you to please bring up your papers.
I think what video offers for us is a certain degree of reality. You can't really dispute what you see on the video. And there is a lot to be learned from that. And there's a lot of ways that we can grow as a profession when we actually get to see this. I just have a flip camera and a little tripod and invested in a tiny little wide angle lens. At the beginning of class, I just perch it in the back of the classroom. It's not a perfect shot. It doesn't catch every little thing that's going on, but I can hear the sound, I can see a lot, and I'm able to learn a lot from it. So it really has been a simple but powerful tool in my own reflection.
All right, let's take a look at the long one first, okay?
Once I'm finished taping, then I put it in my computer, and then I'll scan it and, take a peek at it. If I don't write things down, I don't remember them. So having the notes is part of my thinking process, and I discover what I'm seeing as I'm writing. I really have used it for my own personal growth and my own personal reflection on teaching strategy and methodology and classroom management and just all of those different facets of the classroom.
I'm glad that we've actually done the process before so we can kind of compare what works, what doesn't. So
I think that video exposes so much of what's intrinsic to us as teachers in ways that help us learn and help us understand, and then help our broader communities understand what this complex work is really all about. I think it is a way to exemplify and illustrate things that we cannot convey in a lesson plan, things you cannot convey in a standard, things that you cannot even sometimes convey in a book of pedagogy.
All righty, everybody, have a great weekend. I'll see you later.
One day, we'd like every classroom in America to look something like that. But we still have more work to do. Diagnosing areas where a teacher needs to improve is only half the battle. We also have to give them the tools they need to act on the diagnosis. If you learn that you need to improve the way you teach fractions, you should be able to watch a video of the best person in the world teaching fractions. So building this complete teacher feedback and improvement system won't be easy. For example, I know some teachers aren't immediately comfortable with the idea of a camera in the classroom. That's understandable. But our experience with MET suggests that if teachers manage the process, if they collect video in their own classrooms, and they pick the lessons they want to submit, a lot of them will be eager to participate. Building this system will also require a considerable investment. Our foundation estimates that it could cost up to $5 billion. Now that's a big number, but to put it in perspective, it's less than 2% of what we spend every year on teachers' salaries. The impact for teachers would be phenomenal. We would finally have a way to give them feedback, as well as the means to act on it. But this system would have an even more important benefit for our country. It would put us on a path to making sure all our students get a great education, find a career that's fulfilling and rewarding, and have a chance to live out their dreams. This wouldn't just make us a more successful country. It would also make us a more fair and just one, too. I'm excited about the opportunity to give all our teachers the support they want and deserve. I hope you are too. Thank you.
Okay, that was a good video. I apologize for not having scanned the front and the back, but I have corrected that problem. And however, in doing so, I'll have a document here with has my notes. So you can see from the last article, the greenhouse effects, and as we scroll down, that was the page we were missing. You can see I circled some things and checked some sections here. And then as you scroll down, you'll see that like this right here is actually supposed to be a magnifying glass. I do not draw well, but I was talking about when, that's just a mental note for me saying that when they looked inside the greenhouse schools, they saw this. But I actually put this note right here because this is, to me, this is a magnifying glass saying we need to look at this. If 47% of school teachers are saying that they're leaving because of personal reasons having nothing to do with my school, I want to know what those personal reasons are. And I definitely would like to break that down, but they did not. So that's future research right there, is actually finding out what those personal reasons are. You could do a real easy survey with that. As we scroll down, we see the next article. I put feedback was very important. The next article is a very quick article, and it's a guy it's a professor or an author, Craig Ross, who talks about changing your school, first work on the culture. So you'll see in this article, when you read it, that it mirrors the previous article, which is very good. It talks about the importance of understanding my school's culture, and it talks about how he's in Michigan and how he saw a lot of this. As the principal of an alternative high school, he saw that changes took this effect. The expectation of failure. This is an interesting section right here. DeFauer describes attempts at school reform by cycles. And look at these cycles. Enthusiasm, frustration, and ultimate desertion of the reform initiative. And we see that a lot. Like, hey, y'all, we've got an idea. We're going to do this. Okay, this is a good idea. This is frustrating. I actually saw this one time in the fastest I've ever seen. This guy, for some reason, the school I was working at, the high school I was working at, had contracted with this guy from Oregon, and he was bringing in this huge packet on classroom management. And he gave all of us this huge, it was like a huge box, and it had all this curriculum and this stuff that he had created, and there was no telling how much they paid for this. There's no telling. But he was very enthused, and was like, hey, y'all, we have a mandatory faculty meeting. Everybody has to be there, and you need to be there. So we showed up, and everybody was like, okay, here we go, let's do this. And it went from enthusiasm straight to confusion within an hour. We was like, what is this? And he tried to explain. It was like, we don't understand this. And then by the end of the 2-hour session, we walked out, and people were like, what do we do with this box? And one mentor said, just put it on a bookshelf, and if anyone ever asks, we use it. And I was like, okay. And that's how fast it went. It went from enthusiasm to confusion to absolute desertion. I'm done with this within 2 hours. When I left that school and I moved to college, I remember I was cleaning out all the closets, and I found that box. I was like, what is this? I was like, we never, ever used that. It was, and the reason is, it wasn't well implemented. And as you scroll through this article, you'll see right here, it says, understand the reform. And this sentence right here, every school possesses a unique culture. And that is so true. And that's what we're talking about when we're looking at school culture. For an administrator to make changes, he or she needs to understand the school culture. And it says right here, understand your school culture is essential if you're going to successfully lead the change. That's why whenever there's a new principal coming in, that principal says, hey, everybody goes, okay, we're going to have a lot of changes. Well, the principal comes in and you go, well, he's not doing much. The reason is he's having to study the culture. He has to see who his go-to people are. And that's an issue that I have with a lot of my bosses is when there's a high turnover rate in administration, you go, man, we were just moving well. Everything was clicking. This boss came in and they did a really good job, and now we're having another transition change. So that means the new boss is going to have to take 6 months to a year to learn the system and learn the culture and then go. So when there's a lot of different bosses, and I've had a lot of bosses in all my fields, when there's a high turnover rate, you see that it's like, man, here we're kind of spinning our tires there. And that's why many people say you should hire within. You should promote from within. And that does have its pros, because when you promote a boss or a principal from the school that's already there, then they already know the culture, and they can just go ahead and start making changes as they go. As leaders, we're constantly searching for a silver bullet, but look what it says right here. The important work focus on the school's underlying culture, that there is no solution. There's no magic bullet that's going to change all the test scores. And that's what many students forget, and that's what many principals forget. There's no way to absolutely correct the culture immediately. The thing you need to do is understand the culture and adapt the culture. That previous article says you can do it within a year. So there's no magic bullet. Thus, when the reform itself becomes the center of attention, failure will be blamed on the initiative and its implementation rather than the school culture. Plants a seed, for example, and this gives you an example, if a gardener plants a seed on a cement slab, nothing happens, nothing grows. Well, he doesn't blame, he somehow says the seed's wrong. No, it was the school culture that was wrong. And as you scroll through here, it says right here, the process, reform initiative must be intentionally guided by the leader. So you need to have a good principal, a good leader to do this. Most of the difficulties of such change have to do with the unlearning, because you have to unlearn what you used to know and then change it to something new. Consider school culture when training staff. Teachers are socialized into your school's culture in a number of ways. Often it's through veteran teachers who may have a resistance to change. Thus, it is important that veteran teachers fully understand and accept new directions. That's why as a principal or as any school leader, when there is change, they need to get the veteran teachers on board. I had a veteran teacher one time. I said, "What's this going on with this No Child Left Behind?" He goes, AIM, IMP, and he named off all the state tests that they had. And he said, "I've seen 10 different state tests." He said, "Just go with the flow and just keep getting your paycheck." And I was like, "What?" And he walked away. That attitude that he had was, just don't worry about it. And that filtered through all the new teachers. And they're like, "Don't worry about it." So you really need to get your veteran teachers on board. So when you're making any kind of change, we're going to change this and we're going to affect the school culture. Get your veteran teachers on board. What leaders can do. And look at this. Talk with the teachers. And I circled all these. Talk. Walk the halls. Talk with teachers. This goes to that previous article which talked about feedback, communication, over 8 interactions with each individual teacher as they teach. That's what we need to do as teachers and as principals, is talk to your staff. I had a principal one time, he was implementing this lunchroom, and a lot of the veteran teachers got upset about lunchroom duty. They said it's not fair. So they wrote a letter and they said this isn't fair. And he looked at the staff and he said, "Okay, y'all, what do we do?" He said, "What do we do to correct this?" And there was silence. And everybody's like, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, if you have any ideas how we can correct this duty schedule, then come talk to me." And it relaxed everybody. The idea of a open door policy. The school leaders that hope and implement a change initiative must understand the school culture. Very important. Understand the school culture. Support the demands of the new reform. Teacher must work with the curriculum that they formulate. And look at this right here. It talks about core test must make time. So if you're going to have this new implementation that's going to affect the school culture in a positive manner, you need to field test it. You need this, if we're going to do this new technology implementation, if we're going to use Prezi, if we're going to use PowerPoint in the school classrooms, then we need to field test the directions before we implement it to the other teachers, because it may come out negative. Field test it. Now, Google does this with Google Glass, and iPhones do this. Apple does this with iPhones. You want to field test because you don't want to give them a product that's confusing, because people go, "I don't want this." It's the same thing with school reform. Collaboration, field test, use your core teams, and have people where they can understand it. Give them plenty of time to work with this. It says right here, concluding thoughts. But I thought this was a really good article because this gives a principal's perspective of reform, and it connects it with the previous article, which I thought you might like. So I've got one more video, and that video is on. It's a TED Talk that someone has merged it with graphics. So I hope you like that part. So it's a TED Talk which will do graphics. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. And that was that.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are 2 reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating? How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity, and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which was if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. Some people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I mean, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. It was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really two types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and paediatricians think there is such a thing. But it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out. And on the same whimsical basis, and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? You know, boring stuff. At school, for the most part. It seems to me it's not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. But according to this, attention deficit disorder increases as you travel east across the country. People start losing interest in Oklahoma. They can hardly think straight in Arkansas. And by the time they get to Washington, they've lost it completely. And there are separate reasons for that, I believe. It's a fictitious epidemic. If you think of it, the arts, and I don't say this exclusively of the arts, I think it's also true of science and of maths, but I say about the arts particularly because they are the victims of this mentality currently, particularly. The arts especially address the idea of aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience is one in which your senses are operating at their peak, when you're present in the current moment, when you're resonating with the excitement of this thing that you're experiencing, when you are fully alive. An anesthetic is when you shut your senses off and deaden yourself to what's happening. And a lot of these drugs are that. We're getting our children through education by anesthetizing them. And I think we should be doing the exact opposite. We shouldn't be putting them asleep. We should be waking them up to what they have inside of themselves. But the model we have is this. I believe we have a system of education that is modeled on the interests of industrialism and in the image of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Schools are still pretty much organized on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. We put them through the system by age group. Why do we do that? Why is there this assumption that the most important thing kids have in common is how old they are? It's like the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture. You know what I mean? Well, I know kids who are much better than other kids at the same age in different disciplines, or at different times of the day, or better in smaller groups than in large groups, or sometimes they want to be on their own. If you're interested in the model of learning, you don't start from this production line mentality. It's essentially about conformity, and increasingly it's about that as you look at the growth of standardized testing and standardized curricula. And it's about standardization. I believe we've got to go in the exact opposite direction. That's what I mean about changing the paradigm. There was a great study done recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, there are tests for this. One kind of cod example would be people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? Well, those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? Does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? Now, there are tests for this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, ages of 8 to 10. What do you think? 50? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? Now, this tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is we all have this capacity, and two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up. A lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated. They've spent 10 years at school being told there's one answer, it's at the back. And don't look. And don't copy, because that's cheating. Outside schools, that's called collaboration, but inside schools. Now, this isn't because teachers want it this way, it's just because it happens that way. It's because it's in the gene pool of education. We have to think differently about human capacity. We have to get over this old conception of academic, non-academic, abstract, theoretical, vocational, and see it for what it is, a myth. Secondly, we have to recognize that most great learning happens in groups, that collaboration is the stuff of growth. If we atomize people and separate them and judge them separately, we form a kind of disjunction between them and their natural learning environment. And thirdly, it's crucially about the culture of our institutions, the habits of the institution and the habitats that they occupy.